The religious cults of the ancient world brought to life dark secrets of the occult, the hidden world of the supernatural. Researchers are now discovering that the ancient world's cults and secret societies are founded upon a wealth of technology. Why did an ancient cult communicate with the ghosts of the dead through the power of science? How did technology help a life-size statue of Jesus Christ spring miraculously to life? What ancient science protected a holy military order and its city against certain annihilation? And how did an ancient civilization recreate the mysteries of hell, a newly discovered underworld where no cameras have gone before? The secret science of the occult is our ancient discovery. The study of the occult is where science meets spiritualism. New discoveries beneath these ancient temples are revealing that the ancients combined technology with religion to create an occult underworld beneath the Earth's surface. The story begins in ancient Mexico with the mysterious civilization of the Mayans.
It's easy to think that the occult is just myths and fiction, but when you start to apply archaeology and science, you can really get to the truth and the nuggets of real fact that underlie all of them.
In 600 AD, at a time when the once great cities of Europe were in decline, the ancient city of Chichen Itza was in its ascendancy. Temples were aligned with the solar system, using an advanced understanding of geometry and astronomy. They reached for the stars, the abode of the sun god, and countless other deities. But other gods lived in the darkness underground, the gods of death.
We're very fortunate in that the Mayans decorated all of their temples with glyphs and inscriptions and carvings, which has given us an incredible insight into their life and culture. Even more so is a mysterious 16th century document known as the Popol Vuh.
The Popol Vuh is a sacred text transcribed in the 16th century from ancient hieroglyphs. It describes a mythical civilization, an occult underworld known as Xibalba.
Xibalba is the Mayan underworld, the place where all the souls want to get to be able to enjoy the afterlife. But the thing about Xibalba is it's not easy to get there. It's a real challenge. You've got to go through many ordeals for your soul to be able to enjoy the benefits of the afterlife.
Xibalba lives on in myth. But could it also be an actual place, hidden deep in the earth beneath us? In ancient Mayan culture, Xibalba is linked to the cenote. These are naturally occurring sinkholes, which over thousands of years have filled with rainwater.
This cenote is the source of water for the whole city of Chichen Itza. Without this, the city could not survive. It was so important that they built a sacrificial way, a sakbe, all the way through here, through the jungle, to the cenote.
Human sacrifice has been discovered in the cenote. The remains of small children and even evidence that live women were thrown in has been found by archaeologists. So could the real Xibalba be under a cenote?
Using the clues from the Mayan sacred book Popol Vuh, we can start to unravel the Mayan sacred code. But there's only one place we can really do that, and that's to explore Xibalba itself. We need to dive into a cenote.
This is what John and a team of underwater cave divers are attempting. They have traveled 70 miles west of Chichen Itza, where they are searching for evidence of this ancient underworld.
I've got to admit, this is incredibly exciting. How many people have the privilege to sort of dive and explore such an important archaeological site?
As they probe into the darkness, the team is shocked to find a level of architectural detail almost never seen before beneath the ground. They have uncovered a sacbe, the ritual roadway that connects Mayan temples and ceremonial centers. Is this evidence that this was a place of ritual sacrifice deep underground?
When we see a road like this, that's a ritual purpose, and maybe they made pilgrimages here.
The road stretches 300 feet and is built from locally quarried limestone that would have been cut into shape using stone tools. Like all Mayan architecture, its construction relied on manpower. Its layout suggests that it leads to a place of worship, where votive offerings were made to the rain god, Chalk.
This sack bay, this evidence of construction underground, is absolutely, totally unique. To spend the time to actually cut blocks, bring materials down here and lay them down means this was amazingly important for them.
This new discovery deep beneath the earth indicates that the Mayans thought this place as sacred as the temples that reached up to the heavens, and perhaps that Xibalba is not just a myth. The sacred text of the Popol Vuh describes a chamber of infernal heat. Down here in the darkness, the temperature reaches over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There are bats everywhere. The House of Bats is one of the rooms of Xibalba.
Here we've got bats, thousands of them, flying around all the time. There's no wonder the Maya think of this as their sacred place, the road to the underworld.
The ancient Mayans brought their engineering skills to the service of religion. Opening up here at our feet is the realm of the gods of the dead.
Here we are finally in the huge body of water that all this causeway was made for. And we are right on the final steps in order to have access to the cave, which is right in front of me.
Really easy to imagine as you come down that causeway, that sacred way, just how an ancient Mayan might have felt. It's scary, especially when the bats are flying across your face and things like that. But it is exciting at the same time. And then to come down here and find this pool of incredibly clear, sweet water in a dry place such as North Yucatan, this has to be a gift from the gods. There's no other words for it.
Despite all the team has discovered, this underworld seems to stop short of what is evoked in myth. According to the sacred text of the Popol Vuh, and illustrated in the temple carvings, the way of the dead comes to a path that turns to the west, the way to the afterlife. So why is it blocked with water? Is it because the water levels in the cave have risen over the centuries? To answer this question, it's time to put on the diving gear and investigate the cave complex further. The divers discover that this is not the end of the cave system. In fact, it stretches further and further into the darkness. As they journey deeper, they discover other rooms, some with air pockets that allow them to take off their breathing apparatus. Could these be the houses of demons described in the Popol Vuh?
We enter the first room, and it's truly beautiful. It's wonderfully decorated with stalactites and stalagmites.
Stalactites and stalagmites can only form in air. This is proof that these caves were once dry and that the water table has risen. The Popol Vuh talks about the House of Knives, a room filled with blades and razors that the souls of the dead must overcome on their journey to Xibalba. Did it look like this?
Then we enter another room that has a large pocket of air, so you can walk through this part to get to a further room. You go back underwater, and as you come up again, you enter a further room. It's truly exciting. You can feel a certain energy that comes from the respect and care they showed for this place.
Y entrar ahí es
And entering it is like being in another dimension.
dimensión.
These new discoveries bear an uncanny resemblance to the Xibalba described in the Popol Vuh.
It's fantastic. It's just fantastic because you get here, you just get to the end of the road to Xibalba, and right in front of it, you find a cave that goes exactly towards the west. And I'm excited about the west because this was the road to Xibalba.
The Mayans had a vision of the underworld that corresponded with a real place underground. They peopled it with gods and the souls of the dead. Our discoveries beneath the earth are further evidence of the convergence of the real and the occult in Mayan religion. Our next discovery involves the use of technology in the churches of the Middle Ages. Ancient discoveries will reveal how a life-size statue of Jesus came to life to inspire awe and veneration in worshippers of the 16th century. Religions and cults throughout the world are steeped in mystery, intensified by ritual and dark secrets. Some supposed miracles or supernatural acts have defied logic for hundreds of years. In 16th century England, a full-size wooden statue of Jesus Christ would overawe worshippers by coming to life.
It was able to frown, it was able to smile, to move arms and legs, and the whole thing must have seemed like pure magic to the congregation who were there.
The statue was known as the Holy Cross of Grace, or the Rood of Grace. It belonged to the monks of the Abbey of Boxley, a village 30 miles east of London. Word of its legend spread, and pilgrims throughout Europe traveled to the small village to become spellbound by its miraculous powers of movement.
Now remember, we're talking about a congregation who were illiterate. All they had to believe in was what the church told them to believe in. The image of a moving Christ must have been a most incredible, awesome experience.
The cross was situated on a screen, called a rood screen, in the middle of the church. It was the focus of worship. Behind the screen was the sanctuary, the place of mystery, where the daily miracle of the transformation of bread and wine into Christ's body and blood took place.
Christ on the cross is the main focus of attention, and it allowed the medieval viewer to contemplate his suffering.
Christ's death and resurrection is at the heart of Christian belief. His agony on the cross is a powerful image. In the Middle Ages, such statues were made as lifelike as possible. At Boxley, the statue went one step further. From lifelike, it came to life. In response to a supplication or possibly a donation, Jesus would open his eyes and move his lips.
Behind me on the wall, we have painted images of heaven and hell. These were real places to a Tudor congregation. And the moving Christ made this real. If Christ smiles, you are safe. You will find salvation. You will find your way to that heaven. If Christ frowns, then hell beckons.
What caused a lifeless wooden statue to move and speak? Was a higher power at work? One that could breathe life into an inanimate object? Or was there a more human agency at work? One which sought to exploit the innocence of the faithful? To answer these questions, we go back to the eyewitness accounts of the time when the secret of the Rood of Grace was first unmasked. 16th century England was a time of immense religious upheaval, a time when men and women were prepared to kill and be killed for their faith. King Henry VIII was on the throne. He decided to break England's ties with the Church of Rome because the Pope would not grant him a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. This shattered the unity of Western Christianity forever.
Henry VIII breaking with the Church of Rome is a big step because, and he knows it, he is the first king actually to turn against the Pope. So what he's doing is big, bold, charismatic, and all the stuff that Henry wants to be.
After breaking with Rome, Henry destroyed the monasteries to get his hands on their immense wealth. To rouse popular support, he gathered evidence of the monks' financial, sexual, and religious misdeeds. In 1538, one of his agents handed him a propaganda coup, a discovery that implicated the monks of Boxley in a fraud behind their famous miracle.
A man called Geoffrey Chambers talking about the Rood of Grace at Boxley Abbey. On defacing the late monastery of Boxley and plucking down the images found in the Rood of Grace, which has been had in great veneration, certain engines and old wire, with old rotten sticks in the back of the same, which cause the eyes to move and stir in their head thereon.
The discovery of wires in the Rood of Grace by Geoffrey Chambers exposed it as a temple machine. It was engineered by an unknown English carpenter and operated by a hidden monk. Exactly how the monks manipulated the mechanism is not clear. The physical evidence was destroyed. We can speculate that the head of the figure was pivoted at the back, the eyes moved by wires so they appeared to open, and the lower lip attached with a simple leather hinge that also operated with a wire to simulate speech.
What happened to the Rood of Grace is that it was taken down and it was exhibited in various places in Kent and then finally in London. The reason for this was London was already the biggest city in the world.
The exposure of the miracle as a mechanical fraud served Henry well.
The whole deal with the Rood of Boxley, the Rood of Grace, is that it's one of the showpieces of Henry VIII's Reformation. It's paraded around London, it's shown off the royal court, and finally it's ceremonially burned. And it's used as their biggest single exhibit to prove that the old church was full of trickery and fraud.
Why did the monks do it? Was it a technological extension of the wall paintings and statues that encouraged the faithful in their devotions? Or was it a cynical money-making ploy to bring in gullible pilgrims? We shall probably never know. Our next ancient discovery involves a bitter struggle between two world religions. We investigate a religious secret society that brought the art of war to the service of God and its own survival. Ancient Discoveries has investigated the use of technology and engineering to reinforce the faith of religious believers. Now we will examine how faith inspired new technology to combat its enemies. In the early Middle Ages, the Order of St. John was founded in Jerusalem to care for sick pilgrims. By 1530, they were installed on the Mediterranean island of Malta. Part monk, part soldier, the Knights of Malta dedicated themselves to the spiritual and military defense of Christianity.
The order is unique because it did start as a monastic order with the individuals taking the vows, the monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And it grew into a warrior order as well to defend the faith.
The Knights of St. John were in a religious and military conflict with an Islamic empire that threatened to overrun the whole of the Mediterranean. In 1565, on the island of Malta, they faced annihilation from an invading force sent by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
By the time the Ottomans have got their army ashore, there are at least 25,000 soldiers and possibly 10,000 more men from the navy who can be used if necessary. The Christians have around 500 knights, 3,000 mercenaries, probably another 3,500 Maltese militia.
The order was outnumbered 4 to 1.
If we look at the raw numbers, it might seem that the knights must have been supermen. They took on and defeated 4 times their number of Ottoman troops. Not any old Ottoman troops, but the very best household troops of the most powerful man on earth.
How did the knights overcome these overwhelming odds? Prayer and faith doubtlessly inspired their immense courage and resourcefulness.
They planned for a 4-week siege, and of course it went on for nearly as many months, with appalling casualties. The order was going to survive by the will of God or it was going to perish there on Malta.
The Ottoman armada of 190 ships was one of the largest invasion forces assembled since antiquity.
The thoughts of any knight seeing that huge armada descend on Malta, when the Grand Master of the time, La Valette, had tried for years to persuade Europe that this was going to happen and no aid had come. It was a small force, and we thought, how could we possibly survive this?
The order combined one of man's oldest resources with technology to succeed in battle.
Throughout the history of warfare, men have constantly tried to find ways of harnessing fire, the most deadly element known to primitive man, a way of getting into the primeval psyche of the human. And the Knights of St. John, like the Greeks of Byzantium, like the ancient Greeks, and in the 20th century, flamethrowers and napalm, they found a way of harnessing fire for military purposes.
Andrew has come to Malta's National Library, home to precious documents of the order dating back to before the Great Siege. He has unearthed a text that could reveal evidence of the Knights' fabled fire weapon.
This is the Balbi manuscript. This is the original first-hand account of the Siege of Malta, written by a man who was there in the first person, printed only a few years after the battle finished. This is the most important single account of the Siege of Malta.
The text vividly describes the terrifying destruction wrought by Turkish artillery during the Great Siege.
One of the things Balbi does is, here at page 39, he describes how when the Turks commenced their bombardment during the night of St. Elmo, the fireworks being thrown up by both sides were so luminous that they turned night into day.
Buried in the account is a description of a devastating weapon deployed by the Knights. It was called a trump, an old name for a trumpet. It was a flamethrower that discharged a sheet of fire upon the attackers as they swarmed up the walls. It sometimes incorporated a device which fired a number of bullets.
Balbi tells us how the trumps work, and he gives us a great opportunity to try and replicate those results. Do these things do, on test, what Balbi tells us they do at Fort St. Elmo?
In the United Kingdom, historic gunsmith Ian Henn is taking up the challenge of recreating the military technology of the Knights. He is attempting to build and fire the flamethrower Balbi describes. Using sheet iron rolled into a tube, Ian is producing a large version of the trump that is 12 feet in length. The metal is heated to over 1,000 degrees and then shaped into its trumpet-like design.
We can estimate how effective it would have been, but we can't really tell until it's gone through a proper test firing.
At a disused stone quarry, Ian has come to put the Knights' 16th century flamethrower to the test.
We'll be using modern blasting gunpowder, very similar to the powder they would have used in the Siege of Malta. They had what was known as corn powder, which had been in existence for about 150 years by then, and it's very similar to modern black powder.
Ian's first test will examine its capability as a flamethrower. The gunpowder charge is loaded into the muzzle and then ignited with a burning fuse.
Giving fire!
The first test demonstrates that at short range, the trump could be lethal.
What we've just seen is a highly efficient, early modern flamethrower. Remember, the enemy are wearing long flowing silk robes. They're going to burn just like this. It's a highly effective way of stopping an attack. The last thing these guys are going to be thinking about is carrying on and breaking through into the defenses. They're going to want to put these clothes out. They're going to want to stop burning.
What makes the trump an even more effective weapon is its reported ability to attack the enemy in 2 stages. After the flame shoots out, the texts recount that projectiles were fired. This was done by placing a second charge of gunpowder at the back of the iron chamber and loading it with projectiles. Ian is setting up the trump to replicate this. First, the team will fire the flame from the front of the muzzle. They will then ignite the second stage charge via the touch hole at the back of the trump, shooting out small stones and shards of metal at the target.
Giving fire! Have a care!
There's a lot of flame, a lot of smoke, a lot of noise, not once but twice. So you can be set on fire, you can be shot. And at night, with these large flashes and flares, it's going to be a really frightening thing to be coming up against.
The tests confirm that the trump would have been an effective close-range firearm against besiegers attempting to breach castle walls, and would have performed exactly how the Balbi text describes it. It combines a terrifying stream of fire with a deadly hail of shot. But the trump is not the only extraordinary weapon mentioned by Balbi in his account of the siege. The ancient manuscript tells us about an even deadlier secret weapon, one that helped the Knights of St. John secure their extraordinary victory. In 1565, on the Mediterranean island of Malta, a religious order of warrior monks called the Knights of St. John was under siege by a force 4 times its size, sent by the Ottoman Emperor Suleiman the Magnificent. The extraordinary victory of the Knights in their holy war was partly due to the development of terrifying weapons. The mysterious arts of the armorers of the Knights of Malta are being investigated by historian Andrew Lambert. He starts at Fort St. Elmo, where the siege began.
Out here we can see just where the Turkish galleys would have been, forming up under oars, ready to bombard the castle. And there would have been dozens of them, each one with 2 or 3 cannon facing forward, a continuous rain of fire on the seaward side of Fort St. Elmo.
Throughout June and July of 1565, fighting was intense. Both sides were merciless, and thousands of soldiers were killed.
When the Ottomans capture some knights, they crucify them in a mockery of the crucifixion of Christ, and then float them across the harbor to try and intimidate the knights into surrendering. The knights respond by beheading their Turkish prisoners, which is again blasphemous, and firing their heads back into the Turkish camp. There's no quarter expected. This is life and death, and the losers will die.
The knights had to play for time. If they could hold out until the winter, the Turks would have to return home. Until then, they needed every possible device and stratagem to keep the Turks at bay. One of the devices described in the ancient texts is known as the fire hoop.
For the defenders of St. Elmo, this was the crisis. Under constant artillery bombardment, the men standing at the parapet would have been cowering below under heavy artillery fire, constantly being sniped at with muskets. They'd have brought the hoops blazing, 1 man on each side, with long iron tongs. And the trick was to flick them over the top and get them rolling down onto the Turkish infantry as they stormed up the assault bridge.
They're often referred to as firework hoops, and they were in fact smeared in linseed oil with wool and gunpowder. And the idea was that these were like gigantic Catherine wheels spinning through the air. Because of what is on those hoops, we have a sticky, burning mess that is almost impossible to put out.
How would this unlikely weapon work in practice? What was so innovative about the hoop? Could it really give defenders a decisive advantage against a mass assault of determined warriors with ladders and siege engines? These are questions ancient technology expert Richard Windley is attempting to answer using the same materials described in the Balbi manuscript.
So basically we've got a large hoop. We bind it with wool and cotton, and these would then be soaked in flammable oils. And then over the top of that, we start to bind material, something like coarse hessian or any old material which is going spare will do the trick. This is then bound round very tightly and held on with wire, and then it was dipped in molten pitch. They also use flammable compounds.
The flammable compound Richard is using consists of natural oils and waxes, animal fat and gunpowder, ingredients available to the knights during the siege. This was a highly secret formula in the Middle Ages and was applied to the iron hoops usually used to make barrels.
Because I don't know what's going to happen, I'm going to pop the goggles on just for safety and light it, and we'll see what happens. Well, that seems to be burning for quite a prolonged period, and what's interesting is we can actually see the molten pitch dripping off. Now, when I actually applied the pitch to this, I got 1 or 2 spots on my hand. It is very, very nasty, and if you get any quantity on you, it adheres to the skin and it produces very, very nasty burns.
After successfully testing the flammable material, Richard will try out the hoops. At the bottom of the cliff face, a set of targets has been set up to represent the Turkish troops in their flowing robes. Thousands of Turks would have attacked the knights' positions at once. Richard's task will be to set fire to them using the hoops. Despite their simple appearance, the damage caused by Richard's fire hoops is remarkable. It gives us an indication of why the weapon was so critical to the knights. Due to the highly flammable compounds smeared around the hoops, they burn for up to 30 minutes and are very difficult to extinguish. 2 or 3 soldiers could easily have become entangled with just one of these blazing hoops. Throwing these down in their hundreds, the knights sowed panic and destruction among the besieging soldiers.
They actually caused a lot more damage than all the other arsenal of weaponry which they had available to them.
In their own small way, the fire hoops played a critical part in the successful defense of Fort St. Elmo, far longer than the knights had anticipated or the Turks had hoped that the siege would last. So they might just have tipped the balance between success and failure in what was the pivotal battle of the 16th century.
The knights came within days of defeat. By September, they had just 600 men able to fight, but they held out. The Ottoman army was depleted and demoralized. They gave up the siege and sailed back to the east.
These two forces met, they fought it out, and the Christians came out on top. This time, a little bit of skill, bit of luck, some new weapons, but ultimately the Christian West would triumph because it had a more powerful economy, more innovative technology, and within 150 years, the Ottoman Turkish Empire was a backwater, and it was the Christian West that ruled the world.
In our next ancient discovery, we investigate an archaeological site that holds dark secrets. We explore a mysterious world in which the ancients used their knowledge of technology to recreate the realm of the dead here on Earth. In northern Greece, in the middle of the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered a strange site that had remained hidden for over 1,000 years. It was a mystifying maze of corridors and rooms leading to a central sanctuary. In a stone chamber hidden underground, the archaeologists discovered figures of ancient gods. More intriguing were the remains of substantial machinery. Now, ancient historian Michael Scott has set out on a mission to discover the site's secrets.
Well, since 1953, finds have been coming to light at this site that has left us with a mystery. We have a heavy-duty machine here. We have counterweights made of solid iron. We have ratchets, which would have been used as a kind of braking mechanism. But what is this machine? Opinions are divided. On the one hand, some people think that we have some kind of catapult, or indeed several catapults.
The iron machine parts date to the 3rd century BC. If they had a military use, experts suggest they would probably have been part of a large catapult that could have been used to defend the site. There is another, more compelling theory, that the machinery was somehow connected with secret occult ceremonies that were practiced here. The site was a cult shrine dedicated to necromancy, the Greek word for consulting the dead. Pilgrims, both rich and poor, would come from far and wide to discover their fate by speaking with the spirits of those who had passed on.
Also found at this site was a statuette of the goddess Persephone. Persephone, the wife of Hades, the lord of the underworld. Persephone, the woman that Hades came back up from the underworld into the real world to grab and take back down to the underworld as his bride. So what we may have here at this site is not some kind of defensive farm or keep, but actually an oracle of the dead. And these heavy-duty weights, this lifting mechanism, may well be something to do with that oracle.
But why would a place of religious ceremony need heavy machinery? Perhaps the pilgrims here needed help in visualizing the ghosts they were consulting. It was not unknown at the time to give mechanical inspiration to worshippers. Was this machinery used to summon forth spirits and not part of a catapult? Michael is taking the route the ancients took to the site, but this time to unlock its mysteries, not to take part in them.
You chose to consult an oracle of the dead if there was particular information that only that dead person knew that you now needed. You went to the oracle of the dead as something of a last resort. You had to be bold, strange, or desperate to go anywhere near them.
To recreate the awe-inspiring experience, Michael follows the same route that would have been traced by an ancient pilgrim, as described by Herodotus in his book, The Histories, written in the 5th century BC. Herodotus locates the Oracle of the Dead on the river Acheron in the northwest of Greece. It still flows into the sea near the ruins of our ancient site. In Greek mythology, the Acheron was one of the rivers that flowed into Hades, the hell of the ancient world. The souls of the dead were ferried across by the boatman Charon. Visitors to the oracle would have passed this way and been reminded that the underworld was near.
To come here on the Acheron River, to follow that route in search of the oracle of the dead, is to get back into the footsteps, to make the journey that those ancients made all the way to try and find the answer to their questions. And so it makes it so much more real, so much more exciting, so much more vivid to understand exactly what they felt as they made that journey.
The Oracle of the Dead was called the Necromanteon in Greek, from which we get our word necromancy, speaking with the dead. The shrine was known in ancient texts of Herodotus and Strabo as one of the gates of hell. Destroyed by the Romans in 167 BC, it was buried in the rubble of time. The site was rediscovered and excavated in the 1960s, which is when the machine parts were discovered. The location corresponds to descriptions in the ancient texts. This is the Oracle of the Dead and a gate of hell.
This is the place believed to be the heart of the Oracle of the Dead. It's where the visitors to the Oracle could get in touch with the souls of their dead relatives.
The maze of corridors and rooms begins to make sense. Someone who consults an oracle is known as a consultant. After rituals of purification and sacrifice, he or she followed the narrow and winding passages to the central sanctuary. This is where the mysterious machine parts were discovered.
After the long stages of preparation, and perhaps up to 29 days of fasting, the consultant came here, the final turn before entering the room of the Oracle of the Dead. Here, he may well have been fed with hallucinogenic beans and herbs that were meant to give him an intensely heightened sense of the ghost that he was about to experience. And so he took that final turn and went into the room.
Upon entering the oracle chamber, the consultant would be disoriented by the natural hallucinogens, their psychedelic properties enhancing the pilgrim's perception and emotion.
When you came into that room, it would have been dark, just like where we are now. The priests would have been chanting more and more incessantly, creating the atmosphere. And then, out of nowhere, out of the mists of time and the underworld itself, came a vision of that spirit. and perhaps a voice echoing up, answering your question.
How this happened was shrouded in secrecy, secrets that our researchers are hoping to discover. They are investigating the theory that the mechanical parts found at the site belonged to a machine that lowered the ghostly apparition that ancient writer Herodotus describes in his account of the Oracle of the Dead.
If these apparitions of ghosts did appear, then it's most likely that they came down from above, a first floor from which they were lowered on some kind of crane mechanism. But to get any further, to know for sure, we need to test it out.
Perhaps these apparitions were human. Ancient technology expert Richard Windley is investigating the theory. Using the iron components recovered from the site as his template, he is reconstructing a mechanical lifting device that could have been mounted in a room above the central sanctuary.
There are one or two rather mysterious objects which are sort of cog-like. Now, my feeling is they're probably not cogs. They look more like some sort of ratchet device. And this would be consistent with a kind of simple winch technology.
Michael has joined Richard at the Ancient Discoveries testing facility, where they will try to work out how the ancient priests created their spirit from the underworld. To lower the priest, Richard has constructed a winch-based crane that lowers a piece of rope using a hand crank, similar in principle to a winch on a tow truck. The machine is constructed out of iron and wood and has a ratchet on the side of the shaft. This can be used to stop the weight returning back down.
With a big long handle, you can actually apply more leverage to a relatively small shaft, and around this shaft we wind the rope, so that for every sort of major turn of the handle, the rope is only moving a few inches. We call this mechanical advantage. The handle may move actually through several feet, whereas the rope's only moving through several inches.
Using this mechanical advantage, Richard's machine can lift or lower up to 300 pounds on the rope by applying only a few pounds of force on the handle.
To test this crane lifting mechanism, we've recreated the archaeological site. Imagine I am the consultant coming in to the Oracle of the Dead. Richard, up on the first floor, replaces what is now the church at the site, where there would have been a hidden first floor with the crane tucked away. And below that, we have our stuntman, John, who's going to play the part of the priest who would have been let down into the consultant room to pretend to be the spirit of the dead come to answer the question.
Such a machine was common in the theaters of the ancient world to lower gods from heaven onto the stage. Here, it is used to summon a spirit from hell. In their disoriented state, in the smoke and noise and flickering light of the sanctuary, consultants would believe they had seen a spirit from the underworld.
As the consultant came into the chamber and saw through the mists the priest pretending to be that spirit of the dead the consultant had come so far to talk to, the consultant may well have finally got his answers to the questions he had sought.
The consultation finished with the pronouncement of the oracle. The consultant was sworn to secrecy about what he had witnessed, or rather believed he had witnessed. He was ushered out of a side door, firmly believing in his encounter with the dead.
There wasn't a question of whether they believed or not believed. There was no alternative to the fact that the gods controlled the world and that the dead lived in the underworld. That was the way things were. And so when they came here, when they saw, or at least thought they saw, the spirits of the dead rising once again, it's almost certain that they would have believed what they were seeing, because they had no reason to question it.
Archaeological discoveries in Greece and at the Ancient Discoveries testing facility have revealed the technology behind the supernatural. We now know that the spirits were summoned not by magic, but by machinery. Religions, cults, and secret societies have strived to bring the supernatural into our world, to make the occult real. They have also called on technology to inspire and sometimes manipulate their followers. Ancient Discoveries has revealed the yearning of the ancients to explore the supernatural and their willingness to marry the science of this world to the science of the occult.